Have you ever had a clear idea for a coloring page, but the art supply you were using simply couldn't create it? I think this is where mixed media can completely change the way we see coloring. Not because we suddenly own more art supplies, but because we have more ways to create what we imagine. When we use only one medium, we often focus on learning how to control it. We ask, how do I blend these pencils? How do I create smooth layers? How much pressure should I use? And this is very valuable. Using one medium repeatedly helps us understand how it behaves, what it can do, and also what it cannot do. Every one of us also uses the same medium differently. Even when two people use exactly the same colored pencils and will color the same coloring page with the same techniques and the same colors, the results will not look identical. We put our own style and personality into every page. Very often, it is not about having the best art medium. It's about how we use it. Of course, I always recommend buying a smaller set of better quality art supplies rather than a huge set of very cheap ones, because from my experience, when I was using budget art supplies, creating a certain effect took me twice or even 3 times as long just because I had to fight against the medium. But that doesn't mean that you need expensive art supplies to be creative. It is not a competition about who owns the most expensive pencils or the largest collection. The important thing is whether the art supplies you have allow you to enjoy the process and feel happy with what you create. And when you use an art medium repeatedly, you learn how to work with it step by step. You discover how it behaves, what are its strong and weak areas. But eventually, there may be a moment when you need something more. Maybe you want to cover a large background much faster. Maybe you have burnished your colored pencils and there is no tooth left on the paper, but you still want to add more details. Maybe you need something to cover the layers that you are not happy with. Or maybe the effect you imagine is simply very difficult to create with the medium you are using. This is where mixed media becomes so helpful. You can use another art supply to support your main medium. It can make the process easier, faster, and often even much more fun. And I think this also changes the way we think creatively. When we work with only one medium, we often ask, how can I create this with pencils? But when we understand several art media, we start asking different questions. What does this picture need? How do I want it to feel? Do I want smooth effect, rough texture, a soft glow, or sharp details? We stop trying to force one medium to do everything. Instead, we choose the medium that can create the effect we actually want. For example, I often start a page with watercolors, then I continue with colored pencils, and at the end, I add some highlights with acrylic marker. Sometimes that is enough, but sometimes even after all those layers, I still feel that something is missing. Maybe the page or just the background needs a little bit more drama, or maybe I realize that I don't actually like the colors I chose. I experienced this recently when I started coloring a page from Dark Fairy Tales by Kirby Rosanes. I began creating the background with colored pencils. The area wasn't even extremely large, but it was taking so much time and the result didn't look the way I had imagined. The problem was that I had already applied quite a lot of pencils. So what can you do when you already have a colored base, but you want to cover it or even change the color completely? For a long time, I didn't know how to solve this problem. Then I discovered oil pastels. Suddenly, I was able to fix pages that I thought I had ruined. Something similar I did on a page from Dream Voyage coloring book. I was creating color along for my Patreon, and I created the first layer with alcohol markers and continued with colored pencils. But the page was still missing something. it didn't have enough drama and I wanted the main illustration to stand out more from the background. The problem was that the background already had very strong colors. I wanted to add a yellow glow, but creating a bright yellow glow over a dark base is very difficult with colored pencils, and it's impossible to do it with alcohol markers if you already applied some darker markers and you would now want to apply light markers on top of it. But I started to use oil pastels because I was using them to create the smoke from the volcanoes. So I decided to use oil pastels on the rest of the page as well, and I was able to do exactly what I wanted. If you want to see the full color along of this page, including the explanation of the process and the colors, or if you are interested in more special color alongs, coloring tutorials, or full versions of my coloring YouTube videos, you can check out my Patreon, Nekosimi Coloring. The link will be in the description box below this video. These pages are just examples how mixed media can enhance a coloring page. Not because we are using more art supplies, but because we have more options. And having more options really supports our creativity. When we know that we have a way to cover, change or repair something, we are more likely willing to experiment. We are less afraid to try an unusual color or add a dramatic effect, because we know that we have everything we need to actually create the effect and that we can adjust or fix it later. And through experimentation, we learn. We learn how different art supplies work together. We expand what I like to call our creative library. But this doesn't mean that we need to use everything on every page. There is also a lot of value in limiting ourselves to just one medium. And that's exactly what I did when I challenged myself to color an entire page using only acrylic brush markers. It was really challenging because I normally use acrylic markers only for details, highlights or paintings in my sketchbook. Using them for an entire coloring page was completely different. This restriction forced me to explore what the markers could actually do. I had to solve every problem with the acrylic markers. I experimented with gradient, layering and different types of backgrounds. It helped me to understand the full potential of the markers much better than I would have if I had continued using them only for these tiny details and highlights. If you are interested in more details about this challenge, I have a video about it here on my YouTube channel, and again the link is in the description box. Well, long story short, the acrylic markers did a wonderful job, but I still wanted more depth and contrast. I know that I could create it with more layers of the acrylic markers, but that would have taken much more time. I had already spent several hours on the page and I didn't want to continue adding layer after layer. In the end, I decided to grab my Prismacolor pencils and I used them on top of the acrylic markers and I quickly created the shadows and contrast I wanted. But there is one important thing. This is not a failure of the challenge. I had already learned what I needed to learn about the acrylic markers. I discovered what they could do, where they worked beautifully, and which effects required more time than I personally wanted to spend. On the other hand, it was a great exercise that pushed me a little bit outside my coloring comfort zone. But the point is not to use only one medium forever just because it feels safe. Sometimes we stick with pencils or with any other art media just because we already know how they work, and there is actually nothing that could really surprise us. We may have other art supplies at home, but we are so afraid to use them because we don't want to ruin the page and we don't know how this specific art supply behaves. That fear is real and it's completely understandable. But I have one trick that can help you start using other art supplies as well. Simply choose a page that you really don't like and you know that you would never ever want it to color. Because on such page, it doesn't matter if you mess up. It doesn't matter if you pick the colors that you don't like or that you don't know the art medium yet. It doesn't matter if you create mud on the page. And it's actually win-win, because using the page you don't like lowers the pressure we always put on ourselves before we start a page we really adore. In my opinion, the best approach is to do both methods. Sometimes you can challenge yourself to use only one art medium. This will help you understand more deeply the art media, and you will become more comfortable using it. But at the other times, allow yourself to use everything that helps you create the picture you have in your mind. As you explore your art supplies, step by step, you will start to see connections between them. You will stop seeing pencils, watercolors, gouache, oil pastels, acrylic markers as completely separate tools, and you will start seeing them as options. They become one collection of tools you can choose from, depending on what the page needs. And when you know what those tools can do, your ideas may also become more creative. You may start imagining effects and techniques because you already know which material could help you create it. The effect no longer feels impossible. Mastering one art medium gives us control. Exploring several art mediums gives us options and enlarge our creative vocabulary. Because mixed media is not about putting as many art supplies as possible onto one page. It's about choosing the right tool for the right idea we want to bring to life.